please welcome Kevin Mandia, Taylor Wren, Tim Crothers, and Russ Ayers.
Oh, yeah. Believe me.
You guys remember the assigned seats, right? No, just kidding. I'll go all the way down this way. Wow, we got 45 minutes, so give the briefest and fastest answers you can. I just want to caveat, my name's Kevin Mandia. I am not a CISO, nor could I have been one, because Tim Crothers, who was my CISO, said I did not have a calm enough demeanor during incidents. He's probably,
This is true.
He's probably right, because for me, every time we have an alert, I'd be like, ah, and I'd run down the hallway screaming, it's all over now. Okay. But I want to thank all of you for joining. Now I get to ask the hard questions that I want to ask CISOs. So we got Russ all the way down. We'll start with you. Wait, I can't believe I just did that. 'Cause the first question is, tell us about a moment you had as a CISO that you would say was the hardest moment. Like, what was the bad day of your CISO career? All days are great, is the right answer.
Yeah, probably the worst, I would put it in a couple of days were the worst.
Yeah.
That was probably going to Congress. That was not my favorite. And also because it was a glass shattering moment for me, because I thought, this is all you really have to do. You gather the data, you get the facts, you show up, you tell people what the facts are, and then it's done. Everybody applauds.
Congress is
I'll get carried out on people's shoulders. I almost got carried out, for sure, but not on people's shoulders. And the other thing is, like you said, it takes some practice. You have to learn how to prevent any kind of anger or frustration or anything, right? One of my first questions was, how incompetent are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And so that frustrated me.
What was the answer?
7.3.
I got a little irritated, and I
Good score.
answered in a way I shouldn't have, which was, well, that depends if the range in scale is competence or incompetence, because depending on that scale, I'm about a 5. And the person that asked me didn't think that was funny.
Russ, for the folks that don't know, why would you have been at Congress? What was your job at the time?
Oh, so I was the interim CISO during the Equifax breach.
Okay.
And so I had come in after, we lost quite a few senior leaders at that point, trying to help out. And I was like, hey, wait, I'm just trying to help. Why am I getting all the venom here? Well, that's because it was an urgent issue for many people. It was frustrating for many people that were looking into the company. And so they wanted to ask me very pointed and specific questions that I didn't have all the answers to. And so, of course, they were frustrated. And that was the glass shattering moment for me. I realized in a very, very specific moment, you've got to put yourself in the mindset of the people that are asking you the questions, much more so than even just your own mindset, because they have a series of frustrations that they're approaching this problem with too, and you boiling up your emotions and frustrations back to them will only make it worse. And so I'm here to tell you, you can definitely make it worse. So please listen to these guys.
Yeah, it might be. So it was, by the way, I think there's a whole bunch of folks that could say getting in front of Congress isn't always a barrel full of fun. Tim, similar question. Tell me about one of the most challenging moments you've had as a CISO, and maybe a takeaway lesson from it.
Sure. So, too many to tell. I'll use one from Mandia at CISO days. We're at, this one will probably bring back some shudders for you, Kevin. We're at RSA 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
The countdown?
Yeah,
That
the
was
countdown.
awesome.
So I get a call from my team at, I think it was 2:30 in the morning, early Monday morning. Most of us are out in RSA for the show. Kevin was giving keynote about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that day. And so I get a call, hey, the Lockbit crew just posted on their shame site a countdown that they've breached Mandia and that they're going to dump the data at 3 o'clock, of course, right at Kevin's keynote in terms of timing. Well, we knew with high confidence that Lockbit had not gotten in anywhere in the organization, right? But the problem in these situations, and why this was such a notable moment for me, was this was one of the first times my team and I had to prove a negative, where how do you prove that you're not breached, right? Because they're trying to own the narrative around this, and we had high confidence that they weren't. But then our next thought was, because we're analyzing the messaging, et cetera, and well, they make a reference to MWise, which we had a partner website with, and so maybe they breached there. We'd also, this was when we were still FireEye, and so we had lots of partner vendors that had data, and it's not infrequent when you've got a large partner network for one of those partners to have a security breach of some sort, and they collect the data. We would often get these adversaries reach out, and essentially what they had were quotes, sales quotes to customers, and they trying to claim, oh, we've captured FireEye data, you need to pay us, or we're going to leak this, right? And so we had to go through all those scenarios. And I think back to your point, so long story short, TLDR, they hadn't, and they had no data. They were upset because of a Mandia blog linking EvilCorp with using Lockbit, and they didn't want to, they basically were doing a protest of that and trying to get eyes and visibility. But it was a first time interesting problem. And in terms of lessons learned, I think the key there that we did is calm, right? We got to be methodical, as always, about, well, let's go through. What could it be? How confident? Let's recheck. Make sure that we're still 100% confident that there's no indications of Lockbit within the organization, et cetera. So that I don't think you can over-communicate in those situations to the stakeholders within the organization, right? To help reassure, because put yourself in Kevin's shoes, right? He's about to go on stage, in a big stage at 3 o'clock, and potentially a breach is going to get exposed at the same time. So it was an interesting 24 hours.
And how I remember that day is I didn't learn about this from Tim. A government friend of mine calls up and goes, hey, is everything okay? And I'm like, why? Why wouldn't things be okay? Because somebody's saying they hacked you. So I think I called you.
Yeah.
And how did all our calls begin? Do you remember? I'd be like, so what's my pucker factor? Am I 1 out of 10 on this one or 10 out of 10 on this one?
Right.
And apparently you lie because you're like, it's a 2.
I know.
I'm pretty sure that's what you told me.
I said it was a 2. It wasn't.
You did say it was a 2.
I did.
But it sounds to me like you're actually more worried than that.
No.
No, you're saying your pucker factor, not his. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well,
His
I'll
was
come
10.
back.
No, mine was also 2, candidly, right?
Yours
But-
was 2. Mine was not a 2 because,
Right.
no offense to marketing, there's been a lot of events we've had where marketing outsourced the event to some third party.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just happens and we didn't vet it and we don't know. And I was worried that party had been compromised and we lost maybe everybody's registration data or something.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure I went right at you like, have you checked this? I went into incident response.
But luckily, right, that's the power of a strong team, of a skilled team, right? So we had already started working the problem at 2:30 in the morning, right? I think you called me at like 7:30, I want to say, in the morning.
It's pretty early.
After you had gotten the tip. I had planned to call you at 8, letting you get a little sleep before. And of course, that given us time. So the reason why my pucker factor was a 2 was literally because we'd already validated a bunch of this stuff. And we'd already been working on this for close to 6 hours, if not 6.5 hours. So I already felt comfortable with the team's stance. I think is another good lesson from this is, as a CISO, how well do you trust your team? How well do you really have the ability that if they tell you, you're not second guessing them, I think is a critical piece of success for a CISO.
And for those that don't know what I mean by pucker factor, it's like, how worried should I be? That was always my first question. Hey, do I have to stay up tonight panicked, or by the way, I don't think you ever got above a 2.
What's that?
You never were above a 2.
Not during Mandia and CISO. Yeah. No, we had a research or find a significant flaw. I got to a 4 on that one.
Did you ever tell me?
Yeah, you were right in there.
I think I was a 2 on that one.
You
Taylor?
were higher than the
You
two
guys
on
got
that
some
one.
stuff to work out.
Come on, Tim.
You need to sit down,
oh,
have a beer, and be like, look, these are all the things I wanted to tell you, but I was too chicken shit to do. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's always, at some companies, no question, there could be a filter between CISO and CEO, and they're meeting for the first time. But Taylor, a little bit on your background, and then same question. I love hearing about that hard day and the lesson learned during that time frame, because I do want anyone who's out there aspiring to be a CISO, if you haven't had that stiff punch to the face yet,
So
figuratively,
there's a lot of violence in this. So I got two, but just as quick background, I'm a healthcare CISO. I was previously the CISO of a company called Athena Health, which is about 60% of the U.S. health population had medical records on my system. And then prior to that, I was a CISO at a hospital. Tufts Medicine is a big Boston-based hospital. I live in Boston. I don't have the accent. I'm sorry. I know everyone is very disappointed. But like, there's, I guess, two ways to answer this question. One is so all of these were privately held companies, so you don't know about mine. But I'll share a little bit about two important things. One was, I was sort of sharing with these guys before, the 2020 US Olympics, the US team might not have had as much success in Japan as they did had we not quickly discovered and mitigated some, if folks recall, that was the year of the load balancer, Citrix Gateway, forget the other.
I have no scars from that.
And the long story short, without going too far into it, is everything that said would go wrong went wrong that day. We obviously executed our incident response plan, brought in the right team, got to the bottom of things very quickly. We'd practiced these events time and time again. We knew exactly what to do, and so just getting to the facts quickly, and then being able to position management in a position to make decisions through lots of tabletopping that we had also done. Honestly, it was a bad day. We had lots of problems. We realized our inventories were not good, especially because the fact that the bad thing that we discovered on this really critical system actually came from some dude who was like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about this one system that I've been running by myself for the last 4 years underneath my desk, right? And you kind of know, hey, I think I'm pretty good, and you have moments like that, and you realize you're not that great, right? So that was an interesting one, and it really highlighted for us that observability of systems was critical. We needed more of it. We could never not have enough of it, and we needed to make attack surface management a much bigger part of our program than we had previously. And the other one is a little bit of a different story. This one, pucker factor, I like that. I would say the greatest things I ever learned being a CISO was when I got down and dirty in it with my customers. And I made this a practice. I still do it at Google. I try to do it, and I try to encourage my teams to do it. But when I worked in the hospital, my office was literally in the basement of a downtown Boston hospital, as grungy as you can imagine it being, not well funded. It's a community hospital, it's an academic medical center, it's a level 1 trauma center. We saw the worst of the worst. Boston Marathon came right through my doors when that bombing happened. I remember I always thought that I knew healthcare well because I'd been in it for 20 years, but I didn't know it well until I started following doctors around and seeing how they used the technology that I put in front of them. And I'd say it was probably not the puckerish moment, it might have been the saddest moment of my career, was when I was rounding with a physician who was treating a mother who had colon cancer and her daughter who's translating. Tufts is in Chinatown. It's a predominantly Chinese neighborhood, so most of the language, we have to have people who can speak Mandarin and English to translate between patients and caregivers and doctors. And this lady's basically passing out. Daughter's trying to work with the doc's trying to log into the computer, can't get past the login screen, gets past the login screen, has 3 more to get through, can't remember his password. Ultimately, mom falls off the bed because she can't sit up anymore. Daughter screams, freaks out. I go over, I'm like, dude, I'm an IT guy, but I got muscles, and I pick mom back up, put her back on the bed. After the whole thing is over, I'm like, what were you doing? Like, you didn't even look at this. Like, why? He's like, because every time I log into this system, this thing crashes. I can't take a note, that I need to take a note to be able to like treat this patient, understand what's going on, look up the medical records so I don't prescribe her something that's going to kill her because she's on 1,000 different things. And it's all because I've got 15 things to log into and my computer keeps timing out every 5 minutes, right? Turns out the root cause of that issue was a patch that we hadn't applied in 4 years to that system. And it took 5 minutes to fix. And it was embarrassing and sad. And it proved to me that, hey, we think we can put layers of security in people that will only make them more secure. In fact, we can do humongous damage by putting and treating risk in the wrong ways, despite our best efforts. And then, of course, the hard part to that was then explaining to the board why this had been the case for the last 10 years and why everybody in security and IT shouldn't be fired. I got flowers on my desk.
Well, I thought that this was going to be a barrel full of laughs panel, and now I'm sober now. Because those are great stories, because the reality is sometimes you forget the impact of what we can do or what we should do. Right. There's been a lot of talk that there's a lot of different kind of CISOs. Maybe each one of you can start off on this, but I'll throw it out there. How many kinds of CISOs are there? Is there more than one?
There's two. There's CISOs and former CISOs, I think.
There we go.
No, then you got to include aspiring CISOs.
Ooh.
In my viewpoint, I think there's three broad buckets.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's the regulatory and compliance focused CISOs, which none of this is intended as judgment, right? This is just my experience with working with lots and lots of folks. Then I think the next smaller bucket, and I actually think that's the biggest bucket in my experience. Then I think the next bucket is what I call the framework-based CISOs. So because I think I lump them and categorize them by their approach for building their program, right?
Yeah.
So the GRC CISOs are taking a regulatory approach to building out their program, their controls, et cetera. Then the framework-based CISOs in my book are using, NIST or, ISO or whatever. Again, no judgment, and that's kind of their model for building. And then I think you've got the technical CISOs. I don't think technical is the right word, but practitioner CISOs. Yeah. Those of us which I fall into that latter category, right? I came up through the trenches. I've gotten to sit in all of the seats at some point over the course of my career. And so I think about the problem and I build my programs based upon outcomes. So I start with things like, well, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to prevent, intrusions, right? Okay, well, how do we measure that? All right, well, containment time. We've got prevention failures that occur. Let's measure those, because those are the instances where our preventative controls have failed. That's pretty important component of what we do, so on and so forth, right? And there's lots of different approaches there in that, but I think it's that third bucket, which in my experience is probably the smallest of the buckets, that is really kind of hyper-focused on more the operational aspects than the.
Got it.
And all three of those CISOs, to be clear, have all three of the areas, right? I'm not saying that. This is, from my perspective, is just about what does a CISO lead with, right?
Yeah.
Where do you start from in terms of how you think about that?
And that resonates with me because I would frame it from the way they came up. That's the way that it generally shows up. They will gravitate towards the things that they were taught when they were younger, what they were mentored in, the challenges and experiences that they had will be aligned with where they cut their teeth. Yeah. So my takeaway for that would be think carefully about what you might be if you want to be a CISO, because it's going to have to be well-rounded. I agree with all of those. That's exactly what I see. Yeah. You have technical CISOs, but what a technical CISO, I'd say each one of these has a deficiency. A technical CISO can hyper-focus on some very microcosmic piece. I think the keyhole analogy was a great one, right? They can see great through a little keyhole, but they can't see the whole picture. A GRC person may see it from a global risk and compliance view, but miss the detail of mean time to contain. And so I think you have to look at the side of yourself that you are not and make sure that you have strong players, back to the teamwork, that are going to compensate for that gap. I don't know that you can wake up and instantly gain 20 years of experience in another field. So you're going to have to do that in a very methodical way, which probably is going to entail using others to do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's, I think the only thing I'd add is to build on that last point is we need more CISOs. We need, of all of the types.
Yes.
There's not one better than the other. They're all important. But what we need is those people to be able to build teams that can respond to the needs of their business. And I find it a little weird to say technical or non-technical, risk or not. All those skills are needed.
Totally.
Yes.
So like it's just, and no one is expecting to get it all from one person either.
Right.
That's the other fallacy is the CISO is never the security expert. And if they are the security expert, that CISO should probably leave.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Because they're carrying too much. Their job is to build and run a strong team, get output and outcomes for the customers of the company, contribute meaningfully to the safety and compliance and whatever their objectives are for the board. And again, it's through the organization that the CISO builds, not that person themselves.
And all of you dove to where I was going to. So you're instinctive in your responses. Because I wanted to ask each one of you, we'll start, Russ, and come this way. Just like 2 minutes on your career as you got up to CISO, the path that you actually took, and maybe even elaborate on some of the things that contributed more to you getting to the CISO role.
Yeah,
So
I think
in other words, if you worked at Wendy's for 5 years, you can leave that part out.
that's right.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Well, part of the stuff we shared with you in the Air Force, right? So I worked for Harris when I started.
Yeah.
So big Air Force contingent there. And I actually came up through the technical side. So I'm a computer science person, programmer. That's the way I came up. And back then, we didn't really have a split with security. When it's a military system and we're doing this for the DoD, everything you do is secure. That's part of the same job function. So it took me a while to even realize there was a distinction. And once I got into the commercial world, which was about 5 years after that, I realized that, oh my goodness, there's a huge gap between just default, put code out, get a release, and then make it secure. And that got me into this frame of going with startups. I was constantly with startups. I would go in and say, here's how you can secure your environment. And if you've ever heard me pitch this, my frame is great engineering is great security. If you do the right engineering, it's going to be secure, almost 9 times out of 10. And so I angle more towards the engineering side because I can resonate with the parts that need to get fixed there, just like we said for the tips. What happened at the Equifax breach time is that I was responsible for KML, KYC, AML, a whole bunch of different products that were on type the fraud space identity and the rest. And so when they were looking for somebody that already had security in the background, plus the ability to remediate things for the breach, I was a natural candidate because I had been working on all those things already and I was able to speak the engineer's language. So at least my story, I would say, if you're able to talk to end users, which I was because I was in startups all the time and pitching new products, I was a GM in one case, and then I could also talk to the engineers because I had to convey to them what they needed to change, then you're the perfect candidate to get out of a situation like that because you need to translate between the business and the engineers. It's probably the best way to encapsulate that.
Russ, how long before you were a CISO in your career? 15 years?
15, yeah, so about 15, yeah.
Got it.
That's right, yeah.
Wow, you were much faster than me.
That doesn't surprise me.
That's fair enough. So
You guys are going to hug at the end of this, right?
Yeah, we always
we've been longtime friends. We can give each other a hard time.
Just make me more comfortable.
Life's too short to take it seriously. So I'm old. I got my first IT job in 1984. I was a night computer operator at Teachers Credit Union in South Bend, Indiana.
Yes, Indiana.
Doing reel-to-reel tape backups on the DEC PDP 1160 overnight.
That's the one with the handle, right? That had a handle in the middle, like anybody could pick it up.
Yeah.
Was that the punch cards or?
No, this was reel-to-reel tape, just past punch cards. So, but joking aside, similar to Russ, right? Came up through the technical side of things, and I spent the first decade of my career in what we would now call infrastructure networking back then, right? And then in '94, this internet came along, and there was this local consulting firm that said, oh, well, we got customers wanting to build on the internet, and there's all this talk about you need firewalls. Well, at that point, firewalls were just routers with rules, of course, right? And it's like, oh, I'm a network guy, I know routers. And so that was my pivot in 1994 into security. And then since then, most of my career has been, I don't care about titles, I don't care about, I care about what's the mission, what am I doing, who am I working with, all of those sorts of things. I just have this life view that life is short and I don't want to just earn money, I want to have a meaningful career where I enjoy what I do, right? And so I went to work for GE at one point, for Richard Batelake, stood up GE's first Intel team there, had some crazy experiences. Then I went to Mandia for my first tour of duty, I should say, at Mandia. And then to your point on the question, because I don't want to lose sight of that. So I pivoted to Target in 2014. You might recall they had this little hiccup in 2013 you may have heard of. And so a bunch of us got pulled in to rebuild their programs. And just an incredible opportunity. But I reported to their CIO, Mike McNamara at the time. He's since retired. Best CIO I've ever seen, because Mike was longtime retailer and a technologist. And I literally was in multiple meetings where I saw Mike school our business partners, where, no, that's not how that works. What, are you an idiot? He was Scottish, he a little cut to the chase, right?
Okay.
Et cetera. And so he had this deep expertise, right? He took Target's IT spend simultaneously from $2.4 billion to $960 million in 2 years, while improving their capabilities 100-fold, right? So just cut so much garbage out of it while actually delivering incredible results, right? And so he required all of us as his leadership team, his DRs, to also become experts in the business. And that was really a pivotal moment for me, right? So, like Taylor's example or Russ's example with the engineering, right? At the end of the day, I very much view what we do in security as a support function. We're like that worn out analogy of the brakes on a car, right? We're there to help the business go faster. When we really think about our mission that way, and how do we, set aside all of this stuff and go, look, the business engineering teams, they need to ship code. How do we help? I have yet to meet the business engineering team that wants to ship in secure code. I just haven't met them.
Never.
We've made it too confusing as an industry, et cetera. Again, for interest of time, right? But that's where having then these different expertise allow one to go. So I was 34 years into my, so Mandia was my first CISO title.
So you had enough experience that, over 30, 40 years, you're going to pick up a few tidbits to become a CISO.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, eventually. I'm a slow learner, but what can you do?
But both of you are technical track. That's a key ingredient so far. Taylor, how about your?
Not to embarrass you. So I started my career when I was 8.
Whoa. I didn't know we were going that far back, Taylor.
No, I got in a lot of trouble for this. No, I got a US Robotics 2400 baud modem and hacked my local library to restore the inventory of books that I had taken and not returned. And I did that quite successfully and showed a bunch of friends, and who eventually told their parents, and their parents told the library administrator. My mom was a librarian. And I lost computer privileges for quite a while. No, but from that point on, I think, my first job in college was in security. I was 19, and I ran the security help desk for the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. And from that point, it was always a mix of different things. Like I could understand and read code. I was good at math. I was charismatic to a certain degree, so I could get people to do what I wanted, and that was a surprisingly useful skill. I chose a college degree in math and did a lot of work in that area. And then, not to embarrass myself, but my first CISO job came after 8 years at Pricewaterhouse, where I worked side by side with Charles and a bunch of other folks who were Mandia. It was nice to see them come back because they were the people I grew up with, literally. Yeah. But I was a CISO at 30 after 8 years of healthcare security consulting. And then I was at a large regulated health insurance company in Western New York. Then went to a startup, had that experience, ran a large engineering team, built DevOps before it was a thing. Then left, I did 2 years in banking, which was not my thing. I'm a very mission-driven person. I'll say I was born to work in healthcare. It's just I'll never leave it again. But eventually found my way to the hospitals, and then to the tech companies, and then to Amazon, and then to Google. I don't know if I'd put myself in one bucket or another. As far as like what I say my background is, I just say yes to things because I like to learn, and I somehow live with not having enough liability insurance for anything that I do. And so that is probably my skill set is ambiguity is my jam, and I've learned it. But I think like the things, if I were to look back and say the things that I did right were kind of along those lines. Like I would never walk into a situation knowing fully sure what to do, but I would never leave those situations not knowing what needed to get done next. And even if that required great sacrifices in my own personal time, I would always try to find some silver lining in every situation that I could learn from. And that really brought me to a lot of different places and to different people who would bring me into different situations, and I'd eventually learn from those. And so, like, you know, I've spent time writing software, I've spent time configuring networks, I know how to write Terraform, I can deploy into the cloud, I can configure detection rules in YARL and do all sorts of things. I'd like to think that the thing that I'm best at is learning, and the thing that I try to encourage other folks who are interested in similar career paths is get used to that, because that's going to be the one thing you're going to do every single day. If you're going to be great at this job, is your willingness to like roll up your sleeves and recognize that you might not know something that you need to know, and it's your job to close the gap and not anyone else's. So
I still put them in the technical block coming up, the whole math major thing. But I get it. All of you actually had diverse experiences before the CISO role in reality. Being a PwC
I was thrown
consultant,
into everything.
well, I know you did your 250,000 miles every year at PwC on the airplane, and you had your mandatory Toomey bag that you carried. Am I right?
it was the uniform, man.
Exactly.
Right.
And a United credit card, depending on where you lived, actually. But starting with you, Taylor, and going this way, what is one thing you had to learn after becoming a CISO, or one thing you knew but had to get better at?
Communicating. Talking to people.
Got it.
I thought that everyone understood what I was saying. Like, how could you not? It's so obvious. What are you, stupid? Like, why don't you understand my fancy risk matrix and why SQL injection is a problem and you should fix it and give me unlimited money? I think like getting good at communication required me to understand who I was communicating with. So I forget who said it, but like I would say that like my empathy skills were pretty low.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Like probably the biggest Achilles heel that I didn't realize for probably 15 years after being a CISO was how low it actually was. And that the only way to fix that is like trying to fix it, making an attempt. I know it doesn't sound glamorous, but it's a real kick in the you-know-what to realize that you're not really being received and communicating effectively with people you need to help you. And the reason you're upset and frustrated all the time is not because of them, it's because of you, right? And I think being able to kind of be smart enough and to turn it around and at some period of time that my communication sucked, and it was because I wasn't really thinking about the person's need across the table and how to tell them what they needed to help me, that's when things got easier and better for me.
Yeah, I think, and Russ, you mentioned that too, understanding the frame of reference of your audience is something that does come late in your career. Suddenly at the age of 45, I went, I get it now. So I totally pick up on that. Same question, but I'm going to jump you, Tim.
Okay.
Go to Russ. Because the middle guy gets to go twice as often if I do.
So I would say the biggest thing that was different for me was getting the people that were around me to decide whether or not you wanted to win or whether you wanted to be right. Because a large group that I was with at the time wanted to be right. And my mental model doesn't fit that. It is much more about, is it effective? Does it work? Is somebody else on board with you to get it done? And there was a lot of binary thinking, I guess, is the way I would describe it, in most of my frames of reference early. And so learning how to have that empathy with the other person and realizing that this person just wants to have a win. And from their perspective, it's a dark room in a dark closet, in a dark carpet situation, and you're saying, find this grain of black Hawaiian sand, right? To them, security is very ambiguous. It's scary. Maybe something just happened to them. They've had a tragic business event, And so they don't necessarily know the right questions to ask. They don't even know who to ask it of if they knew what the right questions were. And so being more of a guardian or a steward of that person's trust is probably something that I was not. I agree. I was, on the empathy scale, I'd say it was probably low. Tell them a buzzword and they should react appropriately. And so getting to the point where I realized I've got to get an entire group of people that may be in an adversarial relationship. They may hate each other, literally hate each other. I think, Adam and I talked about we would get people over to the house and do bourbon and barbecue. Some of the people met at my house for the first time. They sat right behind each other. It was a cliche like you wouldn't believe. They had sat within an arm's reach of each other for like 10 years and never knew each other. And so that was the crystallizing moment for me. It was like, well, if I can develop relationships between these team members and get them to all agree on a win, or get them to agree that we're going to be effective, then we got a chance of actually doing something. And I would probably have been 4 times more productive if somebody had taught me that lesson in the beginning. Took me far too long to realize.
No one's going to teach you that lesson. You gotta suffer through that one to get it right. To be honest with you.
I learned everything the hard way, actually.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
This has been touched on. We agree with both of these. What, for a lot of my career, I was had a modicum of natural leadership, but then during my tenure at Target has this incredible high people leadership bar for all of their senior leadership, right? And that was a moment where I realized how little I knew as a leader, and how critically important and what a differentiator is. It's a skill like everything else, right? And investing in it. And my job as a CISO, from my perspective, is to set the vision and here's how we're going to measure success as expectations, and then give it to the team to execute on that, right? And my job is then to help them each be successful in their roles executing on that, right? The mantra that Target executive leadership has is, if you're a senior leader, your job is to figure out how to help each of your direct reports be 3 to 5% more effective every year in their role, and then their job is the same. And think about that compound interest ripple effect then that matriculates through the organization when leaders are focused on investing in their teams and helping their teams be successful, then that of course helps us all be successful. And as Taylor I think mentioned earlier, right? We can't know all of this. That's what makes this fun, in my opinion. One of many things that makes this fun. And so this is a team sport, and so leadership is I think the key piece in order to build that effectiveness of that team.
Yeah, it's amazing how all your answers are actually for any executive role, by the way. It's like, you better keep learning, you better have the right frame of reference, put yourself in the other person's shoes. I have so many questions and we have only 5 minutes. So let's go with this one. What is one thing, and Russ, we'll start with you, one thing in the role that's different than other executive roles for a CISO? Meaning maybe even frustrating in the role, that's unique to the CISO role.
So I would probably articulate in a CISO role, and I don't know the other roles as well, so maybe maybe they would say you're crazy, but I think being comfortable with being uncomfortable is more in the CISO role than probably in most other roles. You have such ambiguity, so many wrong answers, so many right answers, and no clear delineation. I mean, even if you went back to the attack, like, he's got to prove a negative, right? And that was what he had to do between 2 a.m. and 7. Oh, awesome, thanks.
On a Tuesday, right?
Yeah, on a Tuesday, right?
Wednesday was Tuesday.
Exactly. So that's likely the area I would think other business leaders probably have, even if they're doing market dynamics, they have something that they're grounding themselves in. We have an unknown threat actor in an unknown place doing unknown things with unknown capacities or capabilities. So I think it's probably the unknown.
Lack of visibility for the role.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think from my perspective, this is actually another aspect of what makes the CISO role fun. We get to play in everybody's sandboxes, right? I think because of our job in defense, if we are going to do it well, we have to be across the board in everybody's sandboxes. And I think every executive role has a certain level of partnering and et cetera. It just, in my perspective, and as Russ said, that I've not been a CIO or a CEO or et cetera, but it just feels that there's some differences there in just the amount of interconnectedness we need to do across the organization.
I like that answer because it's true. It's like, and it's not just, it's a special kind because you're almost always coming in with some, preset agenda almost on what needs to get fixed or changed usually, right? It's very rarely like, we're here to help, like, and actually mean it. It's interesting. I don't know if I believe the answer I'm going to give, so let me
test it.
That's right.
I think what's unique about the CISO role is kind of what's unique about security, maybe in general. I mean, it's a young role. Like, how long is this job?
It's the first. It's the latest executive at the table, if it's even an executive role.
Yeah, and let's just call it 30 years old, right? And not to sound adversarial, but when you're in a boardroom, you're going up against a CFO and an accounting officer and a marketing officer and a communications officer that have frameworks and playbooks and rules and standards that have had, in some cases, hundreds of years of vetting and implementation that, provide very clear, somewhat arguably, but to some people valuable information about the performance of their function. Right? We have Jack for security.
We also have the lowest budget usually.
Yeah, also that true. Yeah. Right. So I always thought it was interesting. I'd go into my board meetings and I'd have my slides and my metrics and I did okay. I'd say I wouldn't give myself an A by any stretch, but I did okay. But then the CFO would present right after me, and it was just like ratios, financial statement performance over periods of time, quarterly, annual summaries of all the data and all the performance of their functions. And I had a little mine's red, yellow, green. Can we do the green one?
I think we're doing good.
Yeah. So now this is the part that I'm not sure I believe, is that I believe that's the experience for most of the CISOs. And I don't think it has to be, nor do I think it's an excuse. Being young is a good excuse.
Yes.
I think we need to push harder and do more. I don't know if we're ever going to quantify everything correctly. I don't think we can. But I think we have a unique disadvantage in that, we don't work in a job that has a long track record of what works and what doesn't. And we have a lot of things that are working against us to tell us what works good and what's not. And not to be a pain in the butt on this, there's definitely things that we can do. I just don't see us doing enough of them to make the CISO role as credible as it needs to be to truly sit on a board. And this is where people go, Taylor, you're crazy. It's I don't necessarily think your average CISO should be on a board of directors. I think there's a lot of things that are differences between the people who are there and the people who aren't. And one of them is being able to be very crisp and clear about what needs to happen and why, and where we got that from and what we should do about it. And frankly, I think there's some great examples of people who are awesome at this. I'm not trying to paint all CISOs with a broad brush. But I do think we get a little bit of this dangerousness to say, in order to be effective, we need to report to the CEO. In order to be good at our jobs, we need to have D&O insurance. In order to be, effective at the board, we need plenty of time and access. Those things may or may not be true in certain situations. But at the end of the day, the one thing that we need is consistent communication, empathy with our customers, being able to speak in business terms, accurately communicate with people who make decisions, even if that's not us. And those, I think, are the things that make this job unique because they require a lot of those skills, which aren't technical at all. Nope. And there's not a lot of precedent to say what works or not. So, it's anybody's guess. But I am very optimistic that we're on our way there. And not to give an overly long answer, but that's what I think is unique.
We've got 0 seconds. I think.
Good.
Can I open it up for questions, Sandra? Yeah, well, let me do this. I would like to borrow 2 minutes of your time. I want to do a quick speed round with each one of them, giving them a quick answer to the following question. Then we'll open up for questions. We have a mic. Speed round. Just go straight down the line. Who should the CISO report to?
Oh, God.
Depends on the business, but I would say if I had to choose, I think they should report to CEO or CIO?
I'm still a fan of CIO in most cases. I agree with Russ. It depends on the business.
Whoever is going to make the CISO the most effective at their job. It could be the plumber. I don't care.
Second question, we'll go this way, back that way. What is a blocker that would keep someone from being a good CISO?
Lack of introspectiveness.
Oh,
Yeah, I think a big blocker I see very commonly is blanket adherence to best practices.
Ooh, good one.
And I would say finding yourself always being right. If you're always right, you're probably not looking hard enough, and that's going to handicap you from doing a good job.
and I will skip the last question because it's.
Oh, come on.
All right, fine. I'm asking them. All right. Let's see what the answer is.
Uh-oh.
What's more important to be a successful CISO? Great management skills or great technical skills?
Great management skills.
Yeah, great management skills.
I mean, I can't say the same thing.
Yes, you can. Well, so to be clear, right, the tricky bit there is that what my technical skills, I'm not doing anything technical today, right? I'm a leader, but what my technical skills allow me to do is select the good technical people.
Yeah.
to
But
lead
can you
the
do that if
technical
you're not
functions.
technical?
It's tough.
That's a good question.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's a softball to an extent because what I've seen is in the evolution, all of us learn the managerial stuff later in our careers, quite frankly. And for a CISO to be an executive, the points that you made here, you got to aim for that. If you want to be a CISO, I think you got to aim for the executive role. And that doesn't mean you're the best at security anymore. It means you're the best at getting the most execution out of your people. You can hire right, you can fire, you can work within a budget. You have the right temperament to be an executive.
I think it's executive first, expert second is the way I always put those things.
Yeah, that's-
Usually it's the flip before you get there, and then it flips. So management is the right answer to this question. There aren't enough answers to this
Let's
question.
open it up for questions, though, because it wasn't enough time. I had a lot more questions, actually. But do we have a question somewhere? Yay.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello?
Hello, Alain.
There we go.
Thank you. With the SEC ruling, boards have become more in tune to a lot of what's happening with cybersecurity in organizations. So are you finding that CISOs' jobs are a little easier as they have to present to the board or getting funding? What are you finding?
No, it's not easy. For a variety of reasons, some pretty obvious and some not. I mean, it's always been hard. I'd be curious what your guys thought. The one thing that I sort of reflect on is like, it's not like the SEC's rule didn't introduce some new problem that people had. Like, it just put a highlight on a problem we've had for a while about board receptiveness, accountability,
Right.
so on and so forth, right? And so now it's, okay, it's on the books. We got to do something about it, right? Now it's like, okay, what are we going to do about it? Which is like, I've seen mostly bad takes on what we need to do about it, other than to say, we need the board to be accountable for this in the way it's accountable for other functions. And that's not what's mandated by these new rules, which I think is going to make it a little difficult in that respect. The one thing that I will say, and this is my experience at Google, speaking a little bit, I think I put a lot of like unintentional consequences on CISOs. For example, I don't know how many people in the room here are accountable for security and work at a publicly traded company, but every word on your website, every word in a contract, every word on a brochure, everything you say at a conference, if it's on the record, it's literally on the record. So if you say, we have 7-character passwords and it turns out you have 6, you can go to jail for that, right? If you have a breach, like that's basically the way the rules are written, because you've made some untruthful material statement that unfortunately now has certain implications. I don't think anybody really thought about that before they actually put that out there. So there's a lot of well-intentioned people who are trying to get better that are sitting here being like, wow, there's a gun against my back right now, and there's not much I can do about it. Now, that's an extreme view. I think the other extreme view is, progress is progress. This is good. It'll shake something up. It'll change something for the better. We don't know what it is yet, but we're about to find out. And I don't like the FAFO way of finding things out, if you guys know what that acronym is. Like, I like to find out in thoughtful, deliberate, constructive ways, not when literally things are burning down to the ground. So anyway, Taylor's opinion only, please feel free to.
No, I agree. It's made it worse. Yeah. For a lot of the same reasons. That I think the root, from my perspective, goes back to what Taylor was talking about earlier, in that we're a relatively young profession, right? If there was some sort of my concern with the new SEC rules is I'm being held to a standard when there's no agreement on what that standard is. I have zero issue with being held to a standard, but that standard needs to be clear so that I can perform to it. And so we're saying there's jail time for ambiguous standards, right? And nobody's got the answers. And so now there's all this board pressure. So the boards are being more aggressive on it because they feel the pressure, which of course is the intent, in my view, of the SEC rules, right? And so I think it's ratcheted up the pressure, and I don't think we need more pressure in our industry at the moment. We've got enough to deal with without that. And so that's why I think it makes it worse, is back to Taylor's earlier.
Yeah, and I would say I'm a little hopeful that when things get stressful like that and there's pressure, we come to better solutions as we go through it. I agree. I'd rather be more methodical and not have to have this pressure applied. But I believe just with the conversations that we've had about it across all spectrums, from regulatory through to board members and to practitioners, I think we'll get to a better answer. So I'm hopeful. Yeah. But in the short term, I don't know that it's going to be making things a piece of cake.
Yeah. I highly recommend following the SolarWinds, situations and the accusations against, Tim, the CISO there. I have, of course, my personal strong opinion on that. One of the other areas that I think, maybe back to Kevin's question about what's unique, is we get a lot of armchair quarterbacking. That's not unique to a lot of executive roles, but it is, I think, a lot more frequent than maybe other roles in that, and hindsight is always much clearer.
I should have said my worst day at work was the day I came in and my boss had just finished reading Sandworm and said, "What are we doing about Iran?" I'm like, I don't know.
Could you give me some?
He's like, "Oh, I just read this book." Yeah. I was just like, "Dear God."
Stop reading.
I was like, that should have been a sign. I should have just been like, "All right, man. Well, here, I'm going to get you like some biscuit woof woof books. Maybe you can read those and approve my budget." I don't know.
Next question.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, there we go. So at a time when CISOs are having to rely on remote vendors, remote workforces, a lot of the experience all of you described happened face-to-face, a lot of mentoring, a lot of being in the shop and with folks. Yeah. What tips would you have for the next generation of CISOs who are now having to rely on a remote workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think remote mentoring can still work well, but we have to be very much more intentional about it, right? Is my experience. So Mandia and our CISO team, I had a leader, Omer Beg, who was just phenomenal about, he would develop his folks, right, his SOC analysts, and bring in a new crop of interns every year and turn them into amazing analysts. And then they go on to Red Team and go on to consulting, etc. He was just a leader that I respected significantly because he'd bring them in, and he did continue doing that just as effectively during the pandemic. He had to figure out new approaches, new ways to go about it, but the net result is, I think we as CISOs absolutely need to think about that more intentionally than maybe we've been able to get away with in the past, because it kind of naturally happened when we're together. That's a great question.
And I don't necessarily want to tell you this trick, and the people that I do it to are going to realize what was happening, since nobody's watching, hopefully.
It's recorded.
Yeah, that's the problem.
But they don't know who's talking.
That's right. I could tell them it's somebody else, right? They don't know. So I think about the times when I've run into a problem, walk across somebody's office. So Tim's down the way, Taylor's down the way, Kevin's there. Hey, what have we thought about this problem? And you get together and you get something extra out that you didn't really think about. And you didn't think initially it was important enough to schedule a meeting. So when I think back to the number of times that has been true, it was a lot. Yeah. So what I started doing is I will reach out to people that are several levels around in the org. They're across the org. They're not up my org structure, just like I would be walking down the halls. And I tap them on the shoulder, and I do that via chat, and I say, hey, what about this? And then if they engage on that, I go, listen, do you have a minute? Let's just pop on video. I try to do video because the body language helps me out a lot more than the audio. I hyper focus on the audio, and I can't really tell, well, did they understand that? Did they laugh at that joke or did they not? Because that's very important to me.
I never wonder.
And so I would say find as many opportunities as you can to mimic what you found good about that personal interaction. And then the other thing I would say is try to force yourself to go out and meet them, see them, go where they are, because it's a lot easier for you to show up in a location than that location is to show up for you. So if you can get somewhere in a central location and these people are remote, they're 100 miles away, okay, we'll have them travel 50 miles and you travel the 300 miles to get to them. So just be very intentional about it.
I think the intentionality is key. I won't repeat it. It's not just a long word with a lot of, it's like, you have to be like specific and have a plan to do this and execute it, or else it's not going to get done. Like that's the people, like I'm intentional. It's like, cool, you're intentional.
Right.
You eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? There's some things you don't need to plan for. This was something you needed to plan for. It was new. And we needed to take it seriously. I would say I was not good at this in my early pandemic days. I was like, oh my God. Because I was the person who needed to be in the office, like literally running into people. That was my style. And I struggled. And I would just say that's another element to add to this is, it's not just that the team needs a bit of a different approach, the leader needs a different approach. And that includes like the leader's own needs. And if you're not fully tapped in on how you operate in those situations and you try to implement an intentional approach, it's probably going to fail and not work that great because you have your own issues to deal with. And for me personally, I had to figure out how I was going to be successful before I could make anybody else successful in that way. So.
And it probably came out as frustration on the other side, right? If you didn't know why you weren't, getting the communication you needed, that's got to be talked about among your leaders.
360 feedbacks,
right.
Loops are superpower magic that every security leader should do, and have all your teams do skip levels.
Yep.
Even though it might be uncomfortable, it's the greatest thing you can do for yourself.
Totally.
Build those feedback.
Good question. We are going to get the yank. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you, panelists. Appreciate it.